Get some elementary school kids that we know will be here till they
Wrote them a letter
graduate.
because it was easier.
Hello, welcome to the April 8th meeting of the Jacksonville Water and Sewer Advisory Committee. I am now calling this meeting to order. The first order of business is the agenda for today, and if everybody's had a chance to review the agenda, can we have a motion to adopt or amend the agenda?
I make a motion that we adopt tonight's agenda.
I second it.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nobody opposed. Next on the list is a consideration of the minutes from the March 11th meeting. Do we have any corrections to make to the minutes? All right, can we have a motion to adopt or correct or reject the minutes?
Make a motion to adopt?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? All opposed? Motion is carried. And next up is Wally with the capital improvement plan.
Good evening. We appreciate everybody being able to make it this evening. If you'll recall, at our last meeting, we discussed the capital improvement plan, and specifically we talked about the projects in the first year of the capital improvement plan, which would be the fiscal year 2022 projects. And this board actually recommended approval of those moving forward to council. So tonight we're back before you to discuss the remaining 9 years of the capital improvement plan. So those would be those projects from 2023 to 2031. Just as a quick refresher of the capital improvement plan process, we start the capital improvement plan with a call for new projects to all departments, not just water and sewer, to submit any new projects that they may have that we need to look at and get included into the capital improvement plan. So from there, we try to work with the departments to generate the scope and the justification for the project, and then try to narrow down some reasonable cost estimates, budgetary at that point, budgetary cost estimates, and then talk to them about where those projects should fit into the 10-year capital improvement program. And then we start developing that as a staff. We go through several refinements. We present it to management and finance to discuss the entire 10-year window. And then we run, for water and sewer, we run those rate models and discuss what impact, if any, it would have on our rates based on our rate model. And then we refine those and start moving those to the appropriate advisory committee so that we can then take it to city council. So tonight, before you, we're going to talk about the other 9 years of projects. Again, these projects are not funded, so they're not really fiscally constrained. Only the first year of the capital improvement plan is funded, but it is adopted as a planning document moving forward. And again, we'll talk about how we've come up with some of these projects. Many of those have been in the capital improvement plan for several years now. They're kind of moving forward within that 10-year window. But we may have a few that are new, especially toward the out years, toward that 30, 31. And specifically, there may be one or two that have dropped off that you may be interested in. And while I didn't include those in the presentation, I'll try to remember to mention specifically one of those. And then next week at the April, I believe it'll be the 13th City Council meeting for budget, we will present the draft CIP to City Council. And of course, that will include the water and sewer portion, as well as recreation, fire department, police department, and any others that may have projects in the capital improvement plan. And then it is adopted, the capital improvement plan is adopted as a whole. Again, only the first year is funded, but is adopted as a whole with the budget, typically sometime at the end of May or in June, but by law, it has to be adopted by June 30 for the next fiscal year. So with that, just a quick reminder, I know we've discussed this many times, but the capital improvement plan is a 10-year planning horizon. The first year would be for the upcoming plan is fiscal year 22, so that's the next fiscal year we'll be moving into, and then it'll carry out for 10 years to fiscal year 31. It's updated and reviewed annually, generally right around this time for this board, and then April, May timeframe for city council. So we found that tends to be a very good timeline, so that if we have to get additional information or move projects around in the budget based on, funding expectations, not just water and sewer, but any of the others, then we have time to do that, and then we get it all put together and adopted as part of the budget. We use it for evaluating the water and sewer rates. We have a 10-year rate model that we use. We program in all of the capital improvement projects, and we look at what, if any, impact there is to the rates over time. We also have a system development fee model. Those system development fees are the fees that developers or builders pay to essentially buy into the system. So what they're doing is reimbursing the system for the projects that have been upfronted by the ratepayers to provide for additional growth. And so we use those growth and improvement related projects that we're going to talk about in a minute to help program those system development fees. And there is statutory requirement behind the system development fees, and that it has to be updated every 5 years. I think for us, that will probably be next year that we'll be looking to update that. I think it'll be for the fiscal year 23. But we use the capital improvement plan to program for those system development fees also. And that meets all of the statutory requirements. And then, again, I know I've said it several times, but only the first year of the plan is what is actually funded. The rest of those 9 years are used for planning purposes.
Wally,
Yes, sir.
silly question. When you present to the city council, I don't know, you call it competing, but you're saying all the departments are presenting their CIP to the council for their approval. How does that work as far as when you're doing your portion of it? Is there a pot of money that you know that is available and you got to fit within that pot? Or how does that work? Are you competing with the other ones for the money that can be given to you? Or how does that work?
That's a great question. So the way it works is the capital improvement plan is broken out by fund. And we say by fund, it's by the funding source that would fund that each specific project. So all of the projects that you're reviewing tonight, whether they be rehabilitation or improvement or growth-related projects, are all funded by the water and sewer fund. And then we have the general fund, which is, typically comprised of ad valorem tax dollars, property tax dollars. So we have projects that are funded by the general fund. Typically, those would be police, fire, and some recreation projects. And then we have a stormwater fund that funds any stormwater-related improvements or changes that we have in the capital improvement plan. And we also have there's one other, it's the council initiative.
That usually contributes to the general fund.
So, and I think we break it out separate, but it's basically, there's a certain portion of the ad valorem tax that is set aside for council initiatives. And those, if it's a council initiative project, those are identified as such as the funding source. So it is broken out by fund. The engineering division, which falls under public services, is responsible for administration of the capital improvement plan. So the engineering division is responsible for all of the projects, not just helping the planning portion and pulling everything together, but they actually help with the engineering, the design, and the project administration moving forward. So we kind of have an in-house, the engineering division is the in-house source responsible for all of the projects in the capital improvement plan. So what you'll probably see on the 13th as it's presented is it'll probably be me. So I, on behalf of the other departments that have programmed projects in the capital improvement plan, I would present, but again, it's broken out by fund. So all the projects tonight, because you're the Water and Sewer Advisory Committee, they would fall into that water and sewer fund. So they don't compete against a street rehab project or anything like that. And that's the other, PAL bill. I'm sorry, I missed PAL bill. So PAL bill would fund like street rehab projects and sidewalk projects.
Thank you.
I've had questions in my neighborhood about this. If I may present a couple of points that may have been lost in your very good answer, but the money that is taken in the water and sewer you pay for goes into what's called an enterprise fund, which means it's got to pay for itself.
That's correct.
And that enterprise fund is what will pay for these. However, some of this might be paid for because the project is combined with the state project. And so not all of these projects are 100% paid out of the enterprise fund. But the enterprise fund does not pay for other capital improvements, but only those that are directly related to the water and sewer. And the general fund could, but is not a practice here, provide money to the water and sewer projects.
And I'll try to point out one or two of those because you do have a few of those where the water and sewer is paying for the water and sewer lines, and then the stormwater is paying for the stormwater portion of the project, and then PAL bill is paying for street resurfacing, and even maybe some general fund if we're doing something with aesthetics. So I'll try to point one. I know we have at least one of those for you to review tonight, so I'll try to specifically point that one out.
And if I may, one more point. The pressure for rates to go up is usually because the enterprise fund is committed to a project that exceeds the revenue of the enterprise fund, which is the rates we pay. And that occurs when you have a project like our water treatment plant, when we did that and you had to get bonds and all that. So the rates don't go up necessarily just because we're doing capital improvements. It's only when it exceeds the revenues, and then they ask for rate increases to cover the costs to operate the water and sewer system.
Yes. And then the types of projects, at least in the water sewer side, that we're going to talk about are specifically rehabilitation, improvement, or growth-related projects. And I'll explain the difference of those in a moment. Rehabilitation projects, some of them you'll see will be dead giveaways because in the project name, it'll either say rehab or rehabilitation. Basically, what we're doing there is something has reached the end of its useful life. We're constantly having to go back and make repairs, or, it's failing, or, in the case of a pump station, it's outlived its useful life. So we're having to either redo the wet well or replace pumps or replace the electronics, the motor controls and those kind of things in the station. But it's typically a 1-for-1. So if we're taking out an 8-inch pipe, we're putting it back in an 8-inch pipe. It's just new construction. So you would see that, a good example of that is where we have, sewer line work in the downtown area. Some of that was constructed in the 40s and 50s. And then you have some in Northwoods that was constructed in the 60s and 70s. And, some of those pipes are actually reaching the end of their useful life, and we're having major repairs. So we're programming those to be rehabilitated. The revenue source for those, again, this all comes from the Water and Sewer Fund, but within the Water and Sewer Fund, we try to divvy up the cost of those to where they should be applied. So because this is replacing 1-for-1, we are funding this solely through water and sewer fees. So those are literally the monthly bill that everybody pays. So it's split out to pay for operations and maintenance, which is an ongoing everyday thing. It includes staff personnel, it includes equipment, it includes electricity to run lift stations and pumps, but it also includes those rehabilitation projects. And then we have, what we do in trying to decide which rehabilitation projects we're going to program or when we're going to program them, we use we have a work tracking software called Mobile 311. It's app and GPS based. It rides on top of a GIS system. So we have people in the field, when that point breaks in a water line, they mark it, they flag it, they put in what the repair is that they made, and then from there, we store that information. And then we can go back as we're making decisions and look at a geographical area and say, we've got to do something in this area because we're really having a lot of problems. And a good example of this that we talked about at the last meeting is that the branch water service. We have been doing, over the past 2 years, we've been averaging somewhere around 50 or 60 water service repairs a year. So at that point, we've got to get it out of our operational budget, going out there and replacing these, and get it into the capital improvement plan and go through and do it as a project so we get better prices. It's not an emergency response in the middle of the night. We're not having to pay overtime to respond. So we use information like that to help program these rehabilitation projects. On top of that, for our sewer lines, we use visual inspections. A good example is the Bayshore right out front here across from City Hall. There are several depressions starting to develop right in the roadway. And, that's an obvious indication that we're having problems underneath, and they're right over the sewer line. So it's pretty easy to track that we have repairs that are necessary in there. So if you start seeing those over a large area, or you start seeing 5 or 6 of those all along the line, you know that you probably have joint failure and you're going to need to do something to address that. And then we can the city has the ability to go in and jet or clean all the lines and then camera the lines. And we do roughly about 10% or maybe just over 10% of our system per year. So if you remember, we have, roughly in town, we have 300 miles of sewer lines. I think about 275 of those, give or take, are gravity sewer mains. So that's telling you we're doing somewhere on the order of 25 to 30 miles a year going through and cameraing these sewer lines. So we use that information also to help not only program our inflow and infiltration, or I&I projects that we'll talk about, but we use that when we're looking at when we have to replace, when we call dig and replace sewer lines. From there, we're going to move into improvement projects. The difference between a rehabilitation project or rehab project and an improvement project is the improvement project looks at infrastructure that does need to be replaced, but then considers that it might be in a basin that has additional growth potential. And there, we may have to go in and replace that existing infrastructure, but if we're going to replace the existing infrastructure, it makes sense, based on our master plans or development pressure that we're seeing, to go ahead and upsize. That may, example of that, you may have an 8-inch gravity sewer existing that we're having problems with, and we may identify that really that needs to be a 12 or a 15. So if we're going to replace it with an 8, we might as well upsize it. Well, what we do there is we split that project, at least budgetary wise, and we say, all right, the water and sewer fee, the ratepayers are responsible for that 8-inch. Well, if that easy round numbers, if that 8-inch is going to cost us $100 to replace, or $100 a foot to replace it, and we look to upsize to a 12 or a 15 and it costs us $125 a foot, the first $100 a foot would go to the water and sewer fees, or those monthly charges each month. And then the additional 25 would be recovered through our system development fees. And our model actually calculates that out for us. Now, we do have to go in and identify what percentage of the project is growth-related and what percentage is rehabilitation, but we do use that to try to appropriately program our system development fees such that growth is paying for itself as it develops out. And then last, we have growth-related projects. So these projects are really in the capital improvement plan because we need to be able to have that backbone infrastructure to support growth. And we really have two different ways that we pay for this. We have the system development fees that we've talked about several times. And again, that is where a builder or developer comes in and has to pay it's based on meter size. But if they connect a single-family house, new connection, then they pay water and sewer system development fees. And those charges, are based on what it costs to provide that growth-related capacity. And again, that's calculated out by the cost of that project. And then from there, we also have what we call sewer service, and it's actually water also, water and sewer service area fees. And what we have there is actually something that we worked with the development community to put in place. And what we've said is the city, through an agreement, will consider putting in backbone infrastructure. There's some parameters around it, but basically it has to serve an entire basin, so it can't be for one development or one property or anything like that. It's got to serve a basin, and then 100% of that fee or that cost is then charged back to the builder as the area develops. And I'm just going to give you some round numbers. So if a builder agrees to this and they go into we go into a sewer service area. So let's say that the system development fees for a single family house for the entire system is $6,000, which is very close. I think we're actually at about $6,100 for both water and sewer, but let's say it's $6,000. In addition, for this area, through an agreement, the city has made an investment, and that investment basically works out to an additional $300 per lot. Then what that developer would be responsible for is that initial $6,000 or $6,100 plus an additional $300. So they're actually paying more than somebody else that is coming into another part of our system. But what we've found through the agreements is that the developers really like this because it helps them get projects out of the ground faster because they don't have to go borrow that money right up front because, the city's water and sewer fund is kind of supporting that. However, there are milestone triggers, there are caveats, and again, it's one of those that has to go to city council for full approval before we can ever do that. But it is a tool in our tool bag. And just one other thing before we kind of get into specific projects, I think it's important for people to understand how traditionally the city has developed. So I'm going to pick on two of the newer subdivisions that people are pretty familiar with is Carolina Forest and Williamsburg Plantation. Well, when those two have developed, the private developer that owned the land that ended up splitting it up for residential lots to be built, bought the property, paid for all of the engineering services for that development. So that includes water, sewer, stormwater, streets, erosion control requirements. Then they pay for all of the construction associated with those improvements before a house is ever constructed. So for a major subdivision, somebody could be out a large sum of money before they've ever sold the first lot. And then what happens is they build it to the city specifications, and because they don't want to be in the water and sewer business forever, they turn it over to us because they build it to our specifications. So that's kind of how we grow our system. But you do have times where you have, one individual developer owns, it may be a large tract of land, it may be 200 or 300 acres. But that tract of land may only be a portion of an overall much larger sewer basin. Well, that developer only has a few ways. They have to build for the full size of that basin so we don't have problems later where the infrastructure is too small to bring additional flow through. So they've only got a few ways to help cover some of those costs. And sewer service or water and sewer service area fees are one of those ways. There's other ways where there's specific agreements that they can enter into. We've seen private mutually beneficial where you have, essentially two large tracts that make up a full basin, and those two get together, or three entities get together and split the improvement based on their needs of the capacity. But the way the city typically grows is, private developers really put in the infrastructure that you primarily see. And then the city is responsible for maintenance going forward, and responsible for that backbone infrastructure, picking up that sewer and carrying it away from the development all the way out to our land treatment site and then treating it. In making some of these decisions, I said before, if I had a great crystal ball, I would not be here, because I'm sure I would be very marketable. But, what we do is we use the tools that we have available. We talk to the development community. We try to keep up with what they're seeing, what the market is doing. We try to keep up with the major tracts of land that are readily available, how close to they are related to our system, what improvements will we have to make to get them into our system. And I just threw up there a few of the tools that we've used over the years. So we have, I've been in public services since 2005 or 6, I believe. It all kinds of rolling together after a while. But before that, we really did not have any major master plans or anything. We just kind of approved development, and we ended up in trouble because we ended up where we didn't have enough to give out. And it was during a critical time where the city was really growing. So we ended up in a special order by consent for sewer with the state. Well, we realized that we needed to really get in and look at what is necessary, and what can we balance so that the city can continue to grow, but again, not put undue pressure on our water and sewer ratepayers. So these are some of the plans that we put together. We're actually on our third or fourth iteration of the wastewater system master plan. We've done, because it's a master plan of the entire city and where we could potentially grow, we've actually broken that down into some sub areas. We have a Piney Green in US 17 North, so that would be kind of the 17 Piney Green intersection, North 17 toward New Bern, and all the way down to kind of that triangle all the way down to White Oak High School. We've kind of looked at that entire area and, could we serve it? If we could serve it, how would we serve it? And how, when is the real question there. When would we have to be able to serve it? And we have both water and sewer pipe models. Our water model is all pipes, all tanks, including our raw water system. It includes all of our valves that we know about. So we can actually see what putting a development into a certain area does to our pressure across the entire city. We have a sewer model where we can do, it's not quite all pipes, but it's major nodes. Especially our major trunk lines, so we can see if we have a 300 lot subdivision coming into a specific area, what that does to our downstream system. We have a water study that we did of the Piney Green area, specifically around Piney Green, Sunset Country Club, and kind of the what is that, Drummer Kellum that comes out on the north side. Kind of in that area, we've looked at that, as well as water pressures in that area. We've looked at, and I know this board we've talked about several times, the Bryn sewer redirection, where we could redirect 1.1 million gallons of our system, which is, roughly a fifth of our system, to the base through Omwassa. Because of the cost, we've kind of shelved that, and you'll notice that that does not come up in your capital improvement plan. What we did is we slid that out a few years. It's a viable project, and at some point, it may be very valuable, but we recognize that we're just not there at this point. And then we've looked at the Springdale area, and the city actually constructed, based on this plan, a wastewater lift station along Blue Creek School Road, and we assisted Omwassa with taking on a failing package plant for Springdale Acres. That actually comes into our system, and we charge Omwassa for that. But we have additional growth because there's some fairly large acreage tracts in that area. So those tracts would come into the city, and we actually have one development that recently came in to the city through that area. And there's a few others that I didn't put up there, but the point there is we're trying to appropriately plan for these projects and make sure that we have a good, sustainable system for existing customers, and that we have the capability to grow and live within the means that we have available. Just as a reminder, we'll kind of use the same template that you've seen before. The color green will represent sewer. So if you're ever out in the field, if you ever seen paint on the road and it's green paint, there's a sewer line under there. We use the water for blue. Same thing. If you're out in the field and you see blue markings on the pavement or in your yard, somebody's marked a water line. And then we've just kind of chosen purple to mean the combination of the two. We'll look at project timing. So instead of, we've got, I don't remember the total number, but somewhere probably around 40 projects. So I'm not going to hit every single one. Some of these are reoccurring programs that you'll be used to. I'll briefly touch on one of those and then just kind of skip over the rest of them. But if you have a question, please stop me. And then we will, as we go through this, where you see the project name, I put a page number for you. So if you're interested in a project, you can flip right through it. If you can't read it on your screen, let me know. I can see it, and I'll tell you which page. So with that, we'll just kind of jump into some of the projects. All of these projects are related to NCDOT improvements that are going to be made. I know we've talked about this a couple of times, but anytime NCDOT does an improvement project that impacts our utilities, we are responsible for a portion of the cost. I don't remember exactly. I want to say it's about 50%. I think they'll pay 50% and we have to pay 50%. But we still have to come up with those costs. Those are replace in kind because typically we're not moving a whole line. We're just adjusting a section. We may have to lower a water line or adjust the alignment of a sewer line. So you can see up there, there's a couple up there that will have some minor impacts to at least both water and sewer. And then there's some, specifically the 258 Super Street, which is kind of from, I think it's Pony Farm Road out towards Richlands. We have water line in that area that runs to our Black Creek wells out down 258. So that's water-only impact. And then at 258 and NC 24, they're looking at DOT's looking at an interchange project, and that is water-only because we don't have sewer in that area. With those, these projects are subject to NCDOT timing and their own funding for their own project. So if you remember 2 years ago, these were all between 20 and 25. They were all front-loaded in our capital improvement plan because DOT had excess funds and were trying to speed projects forward. Well, they ran into a cash shortage and had to stop and move some of those projects out. So they feed us annually. We go back to them and say, tell us where these, belong in our capital improvement plan. We get updated timelines. I'm actually part of the city's transportation coordinating committee. So as these decisions are made and discussions are made, I'm actually get to take part and closely track these projects that could impact us. So you can see where those fall out, and they kind of fall. We do have 2 or 3 that you approved or supported in your last meeting in 22, but the rest of those fall between 25 and FY30. Moving toward the sewer projects, you can see that we have these kind of spaced out. A couple that I kind of want to key in on is and I realize I misstated, so I'll clear that up in a second. But the first one is the second phase of the Western Trunk Sewer Project. We are moving forward with the Western Regional Sewer System. This would be setting a pump station near Gateway North and Western Boulevard to further help take pressure off of the Henderson Drive pump station and the sewer line running along Mill Creek that is running at capacity. It's not over capacity yet, but it is running at capacity, both verified in the field and by our model. And this is timed to start design really following the completion of the initial phases of the Western Trunk Sewer Project. And then the Brynn Marr force main relocation that I talked about, I think we did leave it in 20, I think it actually goes out to 30 or 31. That's one of those that we started looking at, and I think we decided to leave it right in the end of our window. But next year, as we do our system development fee calculations, we'll probably look at sliding that another couple of years. And that one will move forward as we, have pressure either at the Ellis Lift Station, at the main pump station, or if we have capacity issues at the land treatment site. And then those 2 are improvement projects because they do have benefits to the current customers, but they also provide for additional growth. And then the last one I kind of point out on this this page is the Western Regional and Main Pump Station Interconnect. That's shown in 26 and 27. That kind of correlates with that second phase of the Western Trunk Sewer. This is something that council asked us to go back and look at when we presented the Western Regional Sewer System. As part of the initial planning for that project, we looked at an interconnect from the main pump station to this new regional station to where if we had a failure in the force main between the city and LTS, we could actually redirect flow through this force main to the other station and still go out the LTS. So it would actually give us full redundancy in our system for main pump station. The numbers you see in there, we pulled, I think, straight from the original report. Those haven't been updated in probably, how long, 5 years or so that we've been working on this. Because initially it was a concept, and based on the cost of that time, and talking with council and management, we removed that portion of the project. So it's one of those that we have to weigh the risk versus the cost. So we're going to go back, update those numbers, look at what the route of the force main would likely be, see what what the route entails, what construction would be like, and then bring that forth to city council for, further discussion. So that is a new project to the capital improvement plan. Still under sewer projects, most of these are, with the exception of the first project on this slide, these are all rehabilitation projects. The first one on this slide, you may remember last year, what we did is renamed it. Last year we had I think we called it infiltration basins. We have a study where we're looking at possibly converting a portion of the spray irrigation system to an infiltration basin. The advantage there is you're not as impacted by wet weather periods like we are with our irrigation. The first two sites that we looked at, it was basically a wash. So we would gain some benefit, but the additional capacity that we would gain really did not weigh the cost that we would have to go through. But the consultant said, while you identified these areas, there's a few more that you really want to consider. And in addition, there's a few areas that we could improve our irrigation capacity. So we haven't really carried that study much further, but that is something that we will need to do. So what we did is we actually kind of renamed this project so that we could go either way with that. So if we look at infiltration basins, we can go there. If not, we can look at the irrigation improvements. And then the inflow and infiltration is something this board has been very interested in. We have a separated wastewater and stormwater system. Anytime stormwater gets into our wastewater system, we have to treat it as wastewater, which means we have to pump it, move it, and treat it just as, at the waste treatment plant, just as if it is wastewater. So that takes away from available capacity, but it also takes or adds to the treatment cost of the sewer system. And really, it takes away or it makes us lose capacity at our system. This is one of those, it's a never-ending chase you're always going to have, inflow and infiltration as your system ages. But this is a way that we found to continually invest in that rehabilitation and really stay on top of our inflow and infiltration. And if you'll remember at the last meeting, I told you that, we really had in the CIP prior, we had a find it year, which was the first year, kind of that engineering and design year, and then a fix it year, which is the year that we're out doing the work. And what we found is over those two years is really not enough. Our practice is really more of 3 years by the time we do all the camera work associated with it. We do all of the evaluation, put it out for bids, get contractors in, and then actually mobilize and get the work done. It's really taken us closer to 3 years. So what we've done is stagger this out and put that one buffer year in between, because there's no, this comes from the sewer fees, so there's really no benefit in over-programming something that you can't spend or you're not spending fast enough. So we found that we think this will better fit what we're actually doing in practice.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I see where the 3 years are in the FY '25, the next one's FY '26, but I see in the design they're 1 year after another.
Let's see. On page 33.
I'm looking
And
at
then-
the chart that you have up. The chart.
So
It says FY '23, FY '22, FY '24.
those did not get updated. Those are my fault.
Okay,
I apologize. So what it would, so the way this would work is 25 should say design in 25 and construction in 26. And then the second would say, so you take 27 off, or really what's happening is construction starting in 26, would start in 26, but it kind of lags into 27. So then design of the FY 28, 29 would be 28 and 29. And the dozens of times I looked at this, I still missed it. So thank you.
I was confused.
Well, no, I appreciate that. And then moving to our water projects. The first project is just simple replacement. I say simple, but we have a lot of issues with the Memorial Drive water line. That is the water line that runs along Memorial Drive beside the hospital. You know, Memorial Drive loops around. So it runs all the way around, serves all the doctor's offices. We have frequent calls to water main leaks in that area. So this is one that we've got programmed for replacement. And then the Castle Hayne water supply wells is both is really an improvement project. So it's both rehabilitation, not really rehabilitation, but it has benefits to the existing customers, because what that'll enable us to do is better spread our well rotation and better manage the aquifer. And then it also gives us additional capacity if we need it. Of course, our capacity is limited at the plant. It's limited. Our plant can produce up to 8 million gallons per day with some improvements. But right now we're running somewhere between 3 to 4 million gallons a day, I believe, from our plant. And then on the well rehabilitation project, that is just an ongoing program. You'll see there's a 23 and then a 25. And on the next slide, we'll have a few more. What we're doing here is looking at some of those Black Creek wells that were constructed in the 60s and 70s. And we're needing to go into particularly the buildings themselves and, you know, make improvements, redo roofs, redo the skylights so that we can pull those wells if we have to, and then make electrical panel modifications and those kind of things. And so we've got those. This will not be, hopefully after we get through our initial phase, you know, we have roughly 36 wells total. So, but some of those wells are much newer. They were constructed in the 2000s because they're Castle Hayne wells. So what we can do is get a much more spaced out and asset management program going to where we don't end up in this situation 15 years from now. So we're doing a much better job of trying to maintain those existing wells and prolong those lives. And then we have the Drummer Kellum Road waterline extension. This project is one of those that was identified both off of existing infrastructure and off of needs for future growth out in that area. Of course, there is some opportunity to partner with OMWASA if we need to, but we do currently have water service between Piney Green Road and Halltown Road. It's served by a 12-inch main that dead ends right now. It's not looped back into our system. So that is something that in the future we will need to try to do, and that would be a part of this project. And then the water plant odor control expansion really is one of those projects that'll be timed based when we think we'll need it. As we continue to use the water treatment plant, we will have additional odors. You remember the Castle Hayne is a high quality water, but it does have that sulfur smell. So we treat for organics, for water quality and we treat for smell. And the odor control is what helps remove that smell. So again, this will be based on how the plant's operating and part of being good neighbors with the surrounding community and with what's still remaining in our water. And then the southwest tank is probably the other one that I really want to highlight here. Right before Greg Michaud left, he and I did some just kind of preliminary modeling to look at our pressure zones in the city. The city actually has two pressure zones, a high pressure zone, which is not all that high, somewhere around 65 PSI, and a low pressure zone, which is somewhere around mid 40s to low 50s. So, and there's quite a difference there. The boundary is kind of the older areas of the system. That includes Northwoods, the downtown area, the Georgetown area, all the way out to Yop Road. And what we're finding is that far out in our system that we do have some pressure challenges, especially with commercial development and the requirements for sprinkler systems. All of them are required in apartments out in that area, are having to install booster pumps because there's not enough pressure. And it really limits some of the potential and puts a burden on those systems. In addition, people generally like higher pressure. You know, I prefer a shower with higher pressure than, you know, a lower pressure shower. So especially when you get into some of the water reducing shower heads and those kind of things. So we looked at what would it take to improve pressure, and could we essentially go to one pressure zone across the city. And Greg, kind of on his own through some modeling, figured out that if we set a new water tank that kind of mirrored the Commons water tank out in the, 258 Yop Road general vicinity, that we could essentially operate off those two tanks on the same pressure. And then you have a decision, well, what do you do with the remaining tanks? Do you consider to keep those and use them and make improvements to them? Or, you know, do we use them for cell tower leases that we use them for, or what do we do with those? But it is something that, as if we continue to see, especially in that area, we need to look at how we handle system pressure. And in addition to that, it does improve pressure in the rest of the system. So that's a particular project that we, you know, it's a ways out because we haven't done a lot of detailed analysis of that project, but that is one of those that could have an interesting change for the system.
What size tank were you thinking range capacity?
Exactly like the Commons is what Greg modeled. So was that 1.5 million gallons? About the same, about the same height. And part of the reason he used that is because it was already programmed into our system. So all he had to do is take that and move it over and, basically assign that value at that point in our system. And he could see what it did across our system. Yep.
I have a question. What happens in older homes if you raise water pressure like that?
If you go too high, you do have concerns with the older pipes. So that is something that we would have to be careful with. But again, we're talking about taking our pressure up to, the 60, 65 range, not 70 or 80 where you have to come back and put pressure reducing devices or anything on them. So while we could see some, we would expect it more on our service lines and those kind of things than we would in the homes
In-house
themselves.
Themselves,
But it is something that we have to be cognizant of.
okay.
Do you regulate the pressure from the tanks themselves? Is that how it's done? How's it done?
It's done strictly by gravity, although we do have pumps at the water treatment plant that we can use to, kind of artificially increase the pressure, but our pressure is generated by the height of the tanks. So
If you have an area with a water tank and there's a lot more development and more people get hooked on, does that bring the pressure down or equalize it? Or does the pressure always stay the same no matter how much water is being used out of it?
this is where it would be really helpful to have an engineer in the room.
Oh, okay.
But theoretically, the pressure equals out across the system, which is why you loop it. So theoretically, as you add usage, it obviously has impacts. But theoretically, it just levels out across the system. So it's not like you see dramatic drops or anything. I'm sure you did some water pressure.
I was going to say, except during halftime, during the Super Bowl, when everybody flushes at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. So, but, it kind of equals out across the system. But it can have long-term, it can have an impact.
Okay.
And then the Halltown Road waterline extension, that is strictly for growth, and that's programmed out. We actually did have some interest in the 17 North area with a industrial site that was looking at possibly coming into the city, but they ended up going somewhere else.
Where is the city limits up 17 North?
Well, right now we go, if you're looking at property-wise, the Stevenson Toyota and just short of Halltown Road is in city limits.
Okay.
And then if you'll look at page 59, this is one of those good examples that we talked about where we do have split funding. Old Bridge Street Infrastructure and Streetscape is a project where we need to come through and make some improvements. Improvements isn't the right word. Those water and sewer lines are pretty old, and we need to address them. They're not as bad as Newbridge Street, so that's why this project's a little further out. But there are some, we need to do some replacements in that area. But you can see, if you look at your sheet on page 59, if you look under funding sources, you can see that we have the Capital Reserve Fund, which is general fund, and then we have Water and Sewer Fund, and then we have DOT. And based on the estimates that we have available, we've attributed, that part associated with water and sewer to the Water and Sewer Fund. That part attributed to the street is under in an NCDOT grant that we would receive. And to do that, we would take Old Bridge Street as one of our streets. But that's a good example. And then the last water and sewer project that we have is a combination of three streets that we've seen challenges on. Although they are less frequent, but part of it is, when we start making repairs in an area, we note the type and material of the water and sewer lines. And I don't remember specifically, but I think that some of these lines are actually, thin wall PVC or something of a lesser material that was used during that.
Bones,
Yeah, it could be
something like that.
galvanized. So as you start seeing failures in an area, you start to see them more frequently. And, like anything with some of these rehabilitation projects, the priority can shift based on, great example is Seminole Trail. We have a segment of sewer on Seminole Trail that following Hurricane Florence just really started causing a lot of problems. And if you drive down the first block of Seminole Trail off of Sioux, it's like this. And it's because of Hurricane Florence, everything was saturated, and as everything was run off, it just carried the dirt with it, and it started settling. And we've actually found that over time, that's pretty frequent after major storms. And as we start to document those, we're hoping that if we have that happen in the future and we can find them fast enough, there may be even some FEMA funding that's available to help offset those.
Storm related.
Storm related.
Put it as storm related.
But we do have to prove that it is related to the storm. But our digital tracking helps with that. And, you know, a good example of that, although not water and sewer, is a project we're doing right now at Riverwalk Park. I don't know if anybody's been by that project, but we're replacing a stormwater line that runs right down the middle of the park. And during Hurricane Florence, or immediately following Hurricane Florence, as that area was completely flooded, we had major sinkholes develop right in the middle of the park that we had never had before. So we actually, that's one of those that, you know, through pictures and information that we had available, we were actually to get 100% of that FEMA funded. Matter of fact, that project, after we bid it, you know, FEMA goes out and estimates it based off the original plans and what's in, you know, what's there. And when we bid it, it actually came in, I think, $100,000 over the FEMA estimate, and they matched the lowest bid because it was storm related. So there may be opportunities for things like that to in the future with our documentation process. So, you know, those rehabilitation projects can very quickly change priorities. One other example I'll give you is Cole Drive. The first block of Cole Drive entering off of Hargett Street is one that we've put in for FY22. And it's, you know, I hate to say it, but our patches have patches. Mm-hmm. So we've gone into the same place 2 or 3 times to make repairs. And, you know, unfortunately, it looks bad for the city because when we dig in and make a repair, you know, we don't relay a whole line between manholes. What we do is we go in, we cut that pipe, and we may replace, you know, 10 feet or 20 feet, or, you know, but to do that, we may have to open a street. If we can replace it by putting a wrap on it or just replacing, you know, a short segment, then we do that because it's a quicker, less expensive fix. But then over time, you know, 10 feet away may fail. So we have to go back into that spot. And it looks like we've gone into the same spot 3 or 4 times, but it's because we don't have, you know, the ability to completely replace an entire segment of sewer line every time we have one failure. So that's where we start looking at, all right, this is obviously becoming a problem. We've got to get this programmed. And there is some advantages of having it out of our operational budget and into the capital improvement plan. And one major advantage to that is you can spread out that cost. You can capitalize that cost. As we're continuing to, you know, revise the capital improvement plan, like we said, we revisit it annually. Those are likely the more, you know, the projects that you see change priority more frequently. So with that, that's kind of all the projects that we've covered. So we have 7 in the 22 to 31 capital improvement program. So this includes those projects that we discussed at your last meeting that you supported already. And those are included in the final book the final draft that you received tonight. We have 7 projects that are NCDOT related. We have 18 water, 18 sewer, and then we have 3 combined water and sewer. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One, do you see, as you're projecting now, that this will be capable to stay within the water and sewer budget, or are you going to need to get bonds for any of these projects?
The only project that we're looking at bond funding is the Western Regional sewer system, which is about a $40 million project. And that project we are looking at using revenue bonds for. The rest of these, we're looking at priority or primarily cash funding the projects. And when we update our water and sewer rate model, it does look at, you tell it, how do I plan to fund this? So what it does is if you say, I'm going to cash fund all these projects, it looks at not only your operating budget, the revenues you're bringing in, but it roughly tells you where your cash balance is. So we can look out, 10 years is a long ways to look out and project that kind of thing, because we don't know what's going to happen to gas prices. We don't know what's going to happen to material prices, which, by the way, right now PVC is off the charts. We are having trouble getting contractors to verify their prices for very long at all, because PVC suppliers won't. Matter of fact, we're bidding a project right now, and we had one bidder say, well, I just want to make sure you'll accept ductile iron in place of PVC, because I can get a guaranteed price on ductile iron to bid it. I can't get a guaranteed price on PVC. My supplier won't guarantee it for more than a week. So, as those things happen, those are harder to predict, but we do have some inflation factors built into our model. But what I can tell you is over the 10 years, the operating budget that we have programmed in, which is based off our last 2 or 3 years of operating, with some inflation factored in, plus all of the projects, we cover all of our bond covenants that are required, and we still are able to cash fund projects and make all the debt service payments that are required. So we're in very good shape.
So other than what the board recommended for an annual increase, you don't anticipate any rate increases with this approach for the CIP?
Correct. And that covers the full 10 years based on how so if we were to look at the full 10 years following council's program of 2.25%, that the full 10 years completely supports the capital improvement plan that you see, along with all of our operational projections.
Let me be a little nerdy here for a second. Do you know if you will have the amount of bonds that you will have to take out, will you have an equal amount retired in that 10 years?
I don't know that it's equal, but we do have bonds that are retiring within that time period. So in summary, again, I know I've said it a few times, but the funded projects are those projects in FY22. Those are what will be included in the budget. The rest of the capital improvement plan is adopted with the budget as a planning document. So that's what we use to program our rate model, our system development fee model. And as we're going through and looking at projects and speaking with developers, they can kind of see where projects fall out, along with just individual ratepayers and people that are interested in, well, what are you going to be doing in my neighborhood? Or when is this project, when are you looking at addressing, our service lines for the Branchwood area, those kind of things. And then, again, we try to be very careful about splitting out the rehabilitation and improvement projects along with the growth projects, and appropriately funding those. And then, based on our rate model, the plan that you see before you is financially supportable. So our recommendation to you is for you to support the draft that we're carrying forward to city council for the water and sewer projects. I realize that this is a lot of information for you to absorb in one evening, but I hope some of that benefit is that some of these projects we've talked about multiple times now because they are planning projects, and that's really the intent of the capital improvement plan. You know, we're a ship. We don't need to be trying to change course every year. The idea is we've kind of set our course and we make adjustments accordingly. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board for any questions or any comments.
Thank you, Wally, good job.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments?
I just got a curiosity
Yes,
question,
sir.
maybe you can answer. Do we know how many available houses are now? You know, at one time in the market, it was like 1,400 available houses in the area. Do anybody know what that is now?
I have no clue, but what I can share with you is a personal experience. You may be able to add to this, but I can tell you that my one house over from me put her house on the market on a Thursday evening at 8 p.m. By 10 p.m., she had 15 scheduled showings for the next day, Friday. After that, by the next morning, I think she had total 20 for the day. They were literally lined up to see the house. And she had, I don't remember the total number, but multiple offers that Friday night, and it was under contract by Friday night. So I don't know what the inventory is, but I can tell you that now's the time to sell, I guess.
Subject to change, my last report told me that there was 30 single-family houses for sale in Jacksonville.
Wow.
And there was 8 duplexes for sale in Jacksonville. And like I said, that's subject to change because we're moving into the period where people will put up houses. But as Wally said, the previous 2 months, a house was averaging 8 days on the market. And I have that information because I use that to judge my rentals. If people can't buy a house to move into, then they're willing to pay a premium price for a rental. And rentals are also in the same position. There's something like 35 single-family houses for rent right now.
Well, what has changed in 2 years? I mean, 2 years ago, it was like 1,400 houses and units available. What has changed in 2 years?
I guess the market, I don't know.
It just amazes me how it changed so much.
One of the things that changed was we went through a period where apartments were being built because there wasn't enough apartments.
That's right.
And that has kind of equaled out. And so now the prices for apartment and the prices for houses have somewhat together. The other is Department of Defense housing allowances are so high that young men are not staying on the base and they're going out in town. And families are looking out in town by using the private public housing on base. So there's incentives for them to go on base, but they still prefer Jacksonville to being that close to work. And we haven't had a big building. When's the last time we had single-family housing, you know, Carolina Forest, the Commons?
There was some phases that developed out in Carolina Forest and Williamsburg Plantation, but I do know that there's at least several hundred homes in engineering, you know, lots in engineering right now that Parker and Associates is handling because they've worked directly with us. Matter of fact, I know that they've gone through preliminary plan, which means they're at the point where they're designing water and sewer now. So, and that's typical when they start investing, you know, enough money to engineer water, sewer, streets, you know that that developer is getting more serious about moving forward.
Well, and I think we, the city and this board will have to watch out for that because these developers have a tendency to build just outside the city limits and then ask to be annexed because they want those services. That's what happened behind the White Oak High School, right?
Yes, and that's typically how the city grows. There's legislation now where we cannot go and, you know,
Force
annex,
annexes.
yeah, force annex an existing development. You know, it has to be 100% of the area being annexed that agrees with the annexation. And the best way to do that is get one single property owner that owns a large tract of land that wants water and sewer service. Those come into the, you know, that one tract comes into the city as a whole and then develops out, which is exactly what's happened kind of the corner of Gum Branch and Western Boulevard. You know, there's 500 plus homes planned for that area, and it's already annexed into the city to receive city water and sewer services.
And the counter to that is like Oradell, where 80% of the people would like to be annexed and get off their septic systems, but 20% won't.
That's right. Yeah, there is no assistance there.
All right.
Other questions?
I make a motion that the board go forward to the city with a recommendation of the presentation as given by Wally for the CIP.
Second?
Thank you. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. So now we are in the open discussion phase of the meeting. If
The only thing I have is that we are short one member, Mr. Sosa. We congratulate him. He was actually appointed to city council. So we'll be looking for new member to replace him. And I think there is somebody that submitted a application for that and is being considered and will be considered at the next meeting by city council. And then I was informed tonight that we have 2 members that will be leaving in June, so we will be looking for some new members to fill their vacancies sometime following June. So that's really the only thing I think I have to share. Joe, is there, I do have one other thing to share with you. We had our inspection with the state for our entire water system. They literally come out and an inspector goes through every well, every well house, the entire, the water treatment plant, our booster stations, anything I missed, our tanks, our chlorine feed stations, and issues any notices of deficiencies. And I think in our entire system, they found 4 or 5, and they were all related to vent cover or something like that. So there were minor repairs. We've got those already repaired and responded to her so that she's aware. And then on top of that, because we've been doing so well, they actually reduced our sampling requirements. And Joe would have to speak more on that. Joe, you want to kind of come up to Mr. Bryant's seat and kind of share what was decided with our sampling requirements? So Derek, if you'll turn that on for him.
It's basically the chemist, Amy Palashak's been taking care of it since Joe left. But we got to actually reduce our DPPs, our cancer-causing agents, the TTHMs and the HAA5s. They were quarterly, now we're semi-annually, which it's a big savings on money for doing all that sampling. And we also got our inorganics cut in half too, which were also quarterly, and now they're semi-annually. So it's good. It's a feather in the cap. It just shows we're doing the right thing with the sampling. So.
And then on one other side note, I know that there's been quite a bit of discussion about the PFAS issue. You know, Gen X is a chemical compound of PFAS. With some that was located in a shallow monitoring well, you know, near Camp Davis, which is south of us. In an abundance of caution, we had our wells tested, and basically we did have challenges with 3 wells in the testing procedures, so we had to resample and test those, but ours came back clean. So we don't, at this point, we don't have any issues to be concerned with. But that is something that, you know, we'll continue to monitor, and those are ever-changing requirements.
As an open item, can we get the staff to plan on giving us a presentation on the current status of the blue frog and the
Sure.
follow-on frog that people may not be familiar with?
Sure.
And the current status of the maintenance of the water towers?
Sure.
The company that's doing that and where we're at, which ones?
I'd be happy to do that. I actually I had not thought about Blue Frog, but I had thought about that we needed to do our water towers again and talk about where we are in our utilities maintenance or our asset maintenance program for water towers, as well as the revenue that we get from cellular leases and those kind of things. And I plan to have at one of your next meetings some further operational discussions that we have.
Are we in compliance with our membership with the planning board? One of our members are supposed to be there, and is it the planning board's not meeting, so we're not required to be?
No, the planning board, Mr. Sosa was our liaison to the planning board, so that is something that we will need to bring back at your next meeting. Yep.
Thank you. But the planning board's happy with us showing up when they meet?
I talked to Ryan King today, actually, and told him that our plan was to have that on the agenda. Since we had already sent out your agenda, I didn't want to have to modify it.
No, I just want to make sure.
So he's comfortable. He has sufficient participation. He has a quorum, which is really, what he would be most concerned about. And he's not, and we don't, he doesn't have any upcoming concerns. He said next month will be absolutely fine.
So does the liaison count as part of the quorum?
It does.
Really?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry. It is I got used to, but it is
I ask a lot of questions. Yes,
it is
okay.
a full voting member of the planning board. Yes, ma'am.
Jim used to do it where he would go to the Onwassa meetings.
Yes.
And was the liaison. Are you still doing that?
We do not have a liaison to the Onwassa board anymore. And I have not spoke with them. I know they changed some of their meeting times. So I'm not sure. I know they are less frequent than us. So I'll have to make contact and see if that's something that they would be interested in.
Okay.
Motion that we adjourn?
Second? All in favor? All opposed? All right, meeting adjourned.